Let's talk about mapping, process mapping and task logic mapping. Mapping your workflow is a critical component of a good project management. There are many tools to help organize projects, and we'll look at a few of them during this course to get an understanding of what needs to be addressed in scheduling and mapping projects. But first, let's take a look at mapping itself. Mapping is a method for using visual symbols to represent the process of a job or task. It helps you select the best path to complete the project. A variety of alternate paths can then be looked at, and the most efficient map can be chosen. Think of a map that takes you from New York to California. There are a myriad of ways you could drive that route depending on your goal. Your purpose and eventual goal would determine the map that you would use when you embark on your drive. Before creating your map, you need to decide what needs to be done, and that involves writing up all the tasks that might come up for a job. Put your tasks in hierarchical format so that you can organize the tasks and separate them out into like activities. This process is often referred to as decomposition, the process of breaking your work into manageable sections. This is also called a work breakdown structure. When a client gives you a job, before you actually create the job, make the content, you need to figure out what you need to do. You need to map it. Take, for example, this plan to do a website for a jewelry studio called Silversite Studio. You need to break out the discrete things that you need to do. For example, you need to shoot the product first before you can bring it into the website. And you have to have an idea about copy before you finish your web pages, and etc. It may seem like common sense, but doing a work breakdown is the first step towards an efficient workflow. Once you have an overall understanding of the project, it's time to develop a flow chart. And a flow chart helps you use process logic, which lets you see the bigger picture or really view the overall job that needs to be done. Let's say you've been assigned a research paper for your class. You might say the overall process looks like choosing a topic, collecting the research data, writing the paper, and delivering it to the professor. Each of these steps in this overall process would be considered a separate task. Each task, in turn, has its own procedure that needs to be done. A flowchart can be a very important tool to map out the processes and tasks needed. To create a useful flowchart that would represent the process and task logic uses clear mapping symbols. These are needed to represent the workflow that will be followed. So remember, a flowchart is a graphical representation of a process or workflow, which uses symbols to represent logical steps to define a specific logical sequence of events. Flowchart symbols include such things as actions, activity steps, decision points, functions, input and output points. Flowchart symbols themselves have not been codified, nor are some symbols correct and others wrong. But common symbols often used are derived from something called the Unified Modeling Language, or UML. What is important is consistency and understandability. Using what you've learned from making your work breakdown structure, the next step is to develop your process flowchart or map so that you can easily understand the chronology of what needs to be done. The order of the steps taken is important because some actions depend on the ones immediately preceding them. Here is a map for making pasta. You can literally map anything at all in your life, and we will practice mapping for this week's assignment. Here is the process map for Silversite Studio. Again, they're interested in having a website done for their company, and they sell jewelry as described in the work breakdown structure. As you can see, there are certain symbols which are called depends or yes or no decision points going forward, and means that the next action depends on the answer to the previous step. So therefore, if the client doesn't approve, you go back and make changes. If the client approves, you proceed. The task logic map helps you identify important sub-processes. So, for example, taking out one of the steps in looking at it, one of the steps being shooting the jewelry, you might map the specific tasks as we see here. Each task has its own set of subsets. Knowing what needs to be done for the small subsets of the process helps everything function more efficiently and faster, and hopefully prevent unwanted surprises along the way. So there you have it. Map it. You map out the whole project. You do your work breakdown structure from a high level. Then you map the process. Then you address the individual tasks needed to complete your project. This week you will create your own process map and choose one task out of that to map. You're welcome to use PowerPoint shapes. You can create your own shapes in Illustrator or use any of the available software. Most of the software that you can find online for mapping has free versions or 30-day trials. But there are also some programs like Lucidchart, which is free for students. I recommend it. There is also Microsoft Visio. There's SmartDraw. And if you look under reading links and things you need to know, I provide you with a whole bunch of resources that you can choose from to work out your process and task logic map.